All right, now moving on to inequalities. So we're going to treat inequalities like we're going to approach them and use all the strategies that we used for equations here in inequalities. But inequalities are your greater or less than signs, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. These all represent inequalities. And the reason why is because in an equation, x was equal to a single number. Like x has to be 2 or x has to be 1/2. Exactly that answer, no other answers. That's the right answer, nothing else. But if I said to you, give me a number greater than 5, if you were sitting in the room with me, which you're not, which makes me sad, we'd all have different answers. 1,000,000, 10, 6, 5.2, all of those. So if I asked for a number greater than 5, we could have a bunch of answers. Ooh, I wrote that up there. So a number greater than 5, what did I give? I gave 1,000,000 as an answer. We said 10, 6 would work. You could always say 5.2, 5.5. So there's a bunch of numbers that satisfy that inequality. So there's a bunch of numbers that are true. So that's why we call them inequalities, because there's a whole range of answers that are perfectly acceptable. So this is different. Like an equal sign means it must be this one number. An inequality sign means, hey, I've got some restrictions, like it's got to be bigger than 5, but it can be a whole bunch of answers. So this is good. So a couple of quick things. I put this handy dandy chart together just so you can refer to it later. Sorry, my pages are getting caught under the cord that you guys can't see. So the greater than sign, the alligator. So the greater than sign, the big part points to the number that's greater. In elementary school, we probably talked about it being an alligator mouth, and the alligator eats the bigger number. So some words, it might be it's more than, it exceeds, it's over. And so this is the new stuff. So when we represent this on a number line, it has to be greater than 5, right? That was what we set up here. The number had to be greater than 5. Could it be equal to 5? So no, it doesn't have the equal to sign. So what happens when we're representing that on a number line? Because how do we represent all this solution? So if x is greater than 4, we put an open circle because it's not equal to, and then we put an arrow pointing to where all the possible values can be. Hey, it could be 4, it could be 5, it could be bigger than that. That's why there's an arrow on there. Okay, so now we have the less than sign. So less than, so the pointy part points to the smaller number. It's less than, it's fewer, it's below. So those are some language that it would work as. Again, because it doesn't have the equal sign attached to it, we use an open circle because we say 7 is not an answer. Anything less than 7 is an answer, but 7 is not an answer. So it's kind of like catching a ball. If your hand is open, the ball won't stay in your hand. So 7's not included in that. It makes more sense when you're here and you can see me. Okay, moving on, we have the greater than or equal to. So that means it has to be at least 5, or it has to be at least a certain number. It's not less than, it's not under, its minimum value is. So those are some language that's going to tell you that all our number solution is going to be above the number. So in this case, we use a closed circle to represent that, because when I say x has to be greater than or equal to -3, it includes -3. -3 is an answer. It is acceptable. So it's a closed circle and the arrow points greater than. That's pretty exciting. Less than, same sort of thing. It's got less than or equal to. It's got the little line under it. It's at most, it's not more than, it's not above, it's a maximum value. The equal to sign means that we have the closed circle. So if x is less than or equal to 0, we start our number on the number line at 0, and it's with a closed circle. and then the arrow is going to point in a direction of values less than 0. And then this one's the one we've been working with, the equal sign. It has to be exactly the same as, equivalent to. I've used that word a lot, equivalent. It just means equal. And we would use a closed circle, so x equals 5. It would just simply be a circle, and there'd be no arrow either way. So today what we're going to work on is we're going to work on creating those number lines. So here I have an inequality, x. So I always read it, start with your variable, and then your inequality, and then the number. So read it like it's a sentence. Say it out loud to yourself. X is less than, because the pointy part is pointing at the x, so I know x has to be less than 3. Okay, so I'm going to write this out. X has to be less than. So I always say that in my head before I do anything else, because then I know what to do. Okay, so I'm going to draw my number line. It's pretty exciting. I dropped the 3 down first. Oh, you guys can't see that, I'm sorry. I drop my 3 down first, and then I just go, okay, let's do some simple, a few ticks in either direction. So it's kind of like drawing out your axis on when you're going to graph something. So I start with the number I care about in the middle, and then I do a few numbers below and a few numbers above. The lower numbers are always on the left. Like we treat it like it's an axis. So we don't, like 3, we treat it like it's a number line or an axis. So lower is on the left, upper is on the right. Okay, so it's an inequality without an equal sign. So I know that I have to be, what appropriate circle? What does that mean? That is just, are we doing closed? Ooh, can't spell closed. Closed or open. Because it doesn't have, the only ones that have a closed circle have the equal sign. If it doesn't have the equal sign, it's an open circle. So I'm going to let's switch colors here for a second. Let's try green, see if that shows up. An open circle at 3, all looks the same. And then the arrow is going to point in the way that makes sense. So x has to be less than 3. So all values have to be less than 3. Well, the less than values are in that direction. So that's my solution. That's the solution on the number line. Okay, so I always say it out loud to myself first. I don't think you need to write it down, but I say it out loud. I put my 3, because that's the number in the inequality. I do a few values higher on the right-hand side and a few values lower. Those must be there. And then I decide whether it's an open or closed circle. Wow, my printing is getting worse. This is what happens. Open or closed circle. Okay. And then I put my arrow in whatever direction is the inequality. So x has to be less than. So all the values of x have to be less than. They can be anything that's below 3. Okay? Inequalities I find people struggle with at first, but then you get good at them and it's no big deal. Okay, so let's do a few more. Green didn't make much sense. All right, maybe I'll grab my red one. Okay, so number line. This is going to say x is greater than 7. Okay, I'm writing it out in words because that makes sense to me. I read it like a sentence. X is greater than 7. Okay, so I draw my number line. I start with 7 in the middle, values above it on the right, values below it on the left. All right, so now I decide what color is my circle open or closed, and it doesn't have an equal sign, so that means my circle is open. So open at 7, and then x is greater than. So all the values of x have to be greater than 7. So my greater than values are in this direction. Okay, so when you do this, it's going to be kind of hard. I use erasable pens a lot, just because that helps me draw it in. You might want to draw your line a little bit thicker. I don't normally put arrowheads on my number line, just so you know when you see an arrow, that means it's in that direction. So those are some tricks and tips to help you when you're drawing your number lines. Okay, so this one, now we start with a -2, but I always read it at the X. So I'm reading right to left, which is weird, but X is less than or equal to -2. So X is less than or equal to -2. So I always write it like that. I always start wherever the variable is. I don't care what side. X, the pointy part is pointing at the X, so I know it's less than or equal to, and then the number. So I find that helpful for me. So I'm dropping -2 on the number line. So I will tell you guys that this is one of the harder ones when it's negatives. I have to stop and think about it. You should too. What numbers are greater than -2? It's not 3. You're on the negative side now, right? -1 is greater. It's warmer out when it's -1. Okay, less than, it's going to be -3 and 4. So just make sure you pay attention to that. Okay, so now I've done my greater than values on the right and my less than values on the left. What kind of circle am I going to use? Because this one has an equal sign, this time it's going to be a closed circle, so I'm going to shade that circle in. You see that it's closed. And now the values have to be less than -2. So that means my arrow is going this way. All right, so -4 is colder than -2. So those are lower temperatures, lower numbers, the further away they get from 0. All right, so for this one, M is greater than or equal to -8. Again, with the negative, makes it a little bit more difficult. I got to think about it. A number greater than -8 is -7, -6. Lower than -8 is -9, -10. All right, so M is greater than, but it has an equal to sign. Sorry guys, it's hard moving around. So I know my circle is closed, and the reason why I know it's closed is because it has that equal to sign. And M has to be greater. So my greater go in the right direction. Make that a little bit thicker. So it's important that when you're sending me your answers, that I can clearly see which way your arrows are going, and I can clearly see if your circles are open or closed. Those are really important. All right, so again, this one's backwards, but I'm going to read it starting, oh, this is a -n. That's not helpful. Okay, so we got to do a little bit of algebra. I want a positive n. So that's going to be -1n is less than or equal to 6. So I'm going to divide by a -1, divide by a -1, so -6 and n. Now here is the tricky part about inequalities. When you divide or multiply by a negative number, you flip the inequality sign. Whew. So when dividing or multiplying, sorry, not talking because I'm trying to write. All right. So we're going to flip the inequality. So before, the big piece, the alligator's mouth was pointing at the 6. Now the alligator's mouth is pointing at the n. So this is, again, I'm going to read from this side. So n is greater than or equal to -6. It's a lot of writing for this question. So again, I'm going to drop on the -6. Values greater are going to be -5 and -4. Values less are going to be -7 and -8. So it's nice when you can make your own number lines, because then you just have to put a few on, and it's always, you always start in the middle, which is kind of nice. So open or closed circle, I know it's going to be a closed because that has the equal to sign. So closed circle. And n is greater than. So my greater than values are to the right-hand side. So my arrow is going to point to the right-hand side. All right, so now I will have given you, I don't know if you guys can see this, closed circle, and the arrow is pointing this way, open circle, and the arrow is pointing this way, open circle, and the arrow is pointing that way. All right, so now we are going to state the inequalities. So I've given you the number lines, and now you're stating the inequalities. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a variable. You can use any one you want. I always go to x, but I think today I'm going to try n. So n and 3. So I'm going to start there, and I just got to figure out what it is, the inequality I'm going to put in between. So I know if this is a closed circle, I know it's definitely going to have an equal to sign. And then I just look at what values. Are these values greater or are they less than? In this case, they're greater. So the 4, 5, 6, those numbers are greater than 3. So n is greater than or equal to 3. And that's it for that one. Let's move on to number 2. So 3 again, so let's use a different letter. Let's use the letter P. And then 3, so I always start out with my letter and my number. This time it's an open circle, so I know there's no equal to sign. And the arrow's pointing at values that are less than. 2 is less than 3. So P is going to be less than 3. Okay, last 2 examples. So again, we'll use K and we'll use 4. I know I'm picking 4. It's got an open circle, so open circles don't have the equal to. And my values are highlighted, they're greater than 4. So K has to be greater than 4. All right, so now looking at this one, let's say go M and -10. So -10, there's an open circle, so I know it doesn't have the equal to sign. The values that the arrow is pointing at are less than 10, so M has to be less than -10. And that's how you would solve that one. Okay, so inequalities are new, putting them on number lines is new, so make sure you take the time to practice, and the answer keys are in there. So if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.